Officially, there were 14 of the Valar, 7 male, 7 female, and then there was Morgoth, the 15th, who was once considered amongst the Valar but no longer in the later days. But in Tolkien's earliest writings, there were actually several other Valar. In time, I think I'll give them videos of their own, but in this video, I want to focus on two particularly interesting Valar who never appeared in later writings, Makar and Meássë, the abandoned warrior Valar. Appearing in the Book of Lost Tales Part 1, a much earlier version of Tolkien's Legendarium, Makar and Meássë were brother and sister, fierce warriors that belonged to the class of Ainur known as the Valar. They are described as arriving late to the world, only behind another Valar called Omar, who, funnily enough, was also abandoned. But even in their very first appearance, Tolkien doesn't describe them as rather good, straight out saying that things would have been better if they had just remained in the stars. There's a few reasons for this. Firstly, the siblings weren't exactly interested in building up Arda like the other Valar, and instead took delight in other distractions. They moved far from the other Valar, with the exception of Mandos, and in a place called the Outer Lands, they built their own grim halls with the aid of their servants. These halls were aligned with weapons and shields, and lit with red torches, and they were often filled with feasting warriors, the vassals of Makar, who sung songs of battle and victory. In that hall, Makar and Meássë would sit, Makar with a bill, probably a billhook, and Meássë with a spear. Sometimes, though, the siblings were away, hunting wolves and bears in the Black Mountains of the Great Lands. But why were these warriors feasting? Well, it's because when they weren't feasting, they were battling each other in the fields outside the hall in an unceasing war. When warriors fell, Meássë would walk among them, encouraging them to continue or reviving them with strong wine. So violent were these clashes that none of the other Valar went there, and if they wanted to visit Mandos, who lived nearby, they would take great care to keep their distance from Makar's fighters. The only exception to this was Tulkas, who would go among them and fight the warriors, and sometimes Makar himself. He didn't do this because he was friends with them or approved of them, but rather because he wanted to stay in fighting shape. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's very similar to Valhalla, which shouldn't be surprising because we know Tolkien borrowed heavily from Norse mythology. Makar and Meássë are at one point even described as warlike barbarian gods, which really does also fit the Norse aesthetic. But onto the second reason as to why Makar and Meássë should have perhaps remained outside of Arda, and that's that Makar and Meássë were somewhat sympathetic to Morgoth, who was called Melkor at this time. Even before entering the world, the siblings and their servants are described as those who supported Melkor during his discord during the music of the Ainur. When the Ainur enter the world, the others wish to apprehend Melkor before he attempts to do any more damage, but Makar is the one and only Valar who speaks in defense of Melkor. That being said, it would be wrong to say that the siblings were aligned with Melkor. They just seemed to enjoy what he brought to the table, which was chaos. For example, the siblings enjoyed the tumult that Melkor brought to the world, and are described as riding upon the gales and rejoicing in earthquakes and the overmastering furies of the ancient seas. They also enjoyed the war that he brought to the world. When the Valar decided to take the war to Melkor, Makar was happy to equip them in armor if it meant that they would fight. However, when Melkor was brought back as a prisoner, Makar once again defended him, basically saying that things would be boring if they were forever peaceful. The siblings are pleased when Melkor isn't executed and is instead imprisoned. But once again, showing that they weren't exactly allied to him, when Melkor escapes Valinor, Makar and Meássë rally their warriors and do aid in the hunt. Although they are unsuccessful in tracking down Melkor, Makar does manage to find two of Melkor's comrades and kills them. So when the rest of the Valar are mourning the deaths of the two trees, Makar alone is happy because at least he got to kill someone. The only other thing we know about Makar and Meássë is that they were against the idea of settling the Eldar, the Elves, in Valinor. But unlike Ulmo, it isn't really for the right reasons. Makar in particular is fairly blunt when talking about what he thinks about Valinor. And already is it a rose garden of fair ladies rather than an abode of men? Wherefore do ye desire to fill it with the children of the world? Basically, Makar already believed that Valinor was too soft, and filling it with elves, who he believed to be mere children, would only make it softer. And that's all we know, so the question is, why did Tolkien get rid of them? Well, unfortunately, Tolkien never tells us. While featuring rather prominently in the earlier versions present in the Book of Lost Tales, the warrior twins, along with Omar, disappear in the next version of the Legendarium, never making it beyond the 1920s. While Tolkien did chop and change with the Valar even as late as the 1960s, Makar and Meássë don't return at all. They were truly an abandoned concept, something Tolkien sometimes had difficulty doing. But we can speculate a bit. For example, they might have been abandoned because they didn't fit with the later version of the Valar. In the Book of Lost Tales, the Valar are a little more ambiguous in their actions, and some of them are very reminiscent of older pagan gods. But in the later versions, the Valar become much more benevolent, and their roles in Arda are more defined, each having had a purpose that Ilúvatar designed for them. Then, it becomes hard to justify the existence of Meássë and Makar. What is the point of two barbarian war gods who do nothing but hunt, fight, and watch their servants fight? Orome already fulfilled the role of a hunter, and Tulkas fulfilled the role of a fighter, while being good-natured about it. Another reason could just be that Makar and Meássë complicated things too much as the world building and the story began to unfold in more depth. In the older version of the story, they did play a part in the events that related to Morgoth. So what part would they play in things like the rebellion of the Noldor, the kinslaying at Alcalonde, or the War of Wrath? Remember, these two guys loved war and chaos, so it seems like they would love all of the warfare and destruction that played out in Middle-earth. Surely, they would have to be a part of it, otherwise it wouldn't make sense. But then, you would have to give them a greater role in the story. And in the war between the Elves and Morgoth, how would two relatively neutral war gods play a part? What role would you give them? Sure, Tolkien could invent a reason for them to sit it out, to remain in their isolated home, watching their servants fight it out in endless battles. But then, what's the point of them? They would remain an interesting part of the lore, sure, but they wouldn't really feel like they were fitting into it. So perhaps Tolkien decided it would be easier to just get rid of them. It's not like they were essential in the original story, so it's not like the later version would have to be greatly reconceptualized in their absence. Nevertheless, maybe it would have been cool if they remained behind. They would still be more explainable than Tom Bombadil. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. I'm going to be honest, I completely forgot about these two characters until I saw someone bring it up a few months ago. There's just so much stuff in the Book of Lost Tales that it's easy for information to enter your brain and immediately leave it. Anyway, I hope this is something new for you guys, and hopefully I'll do videos on some of the other abandoned Valar as well. Cheers, farewell, and remember, be like Makar, find joy in murder.